Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to our today's webinar, First Steps into Knime Analytics Platform for Excel Users. My name is Katrin and I'm one of the data scientists in the evangelism team at Knime. And today I would like to show you how you can make your first steps in Knime Analytics Platform as an Excel user. And during my webinar today, I will show you how you can actually automate an Excel process by using the open source tool Knime Analytics Platform, and I want to perform the first steps with you together. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. Please use our Q&A section to post your question or also to upvote your favorite questions from other participants. For your information, this session today is recorded and will be available afterwards on YouTube. And I will share some links and promotion codes with you throughout the webinar, but don't worry, you don't need to write them down right away. We will send you afterwards a follow-up email, and in the follow-up email, you will have on one hand the slides where you have the links and promotion codes, and we will share them also in the email right away. How can you ask questions? If you want to ask questions, then you need to click on this little Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. And then a new window will pop up where you can ask your questions or write your questions. And then either Marit will keep, my colleague Marit, who is also in the call, will answer them right away, or she will keep them for the end, and then I will answer them in the end. And with this, I think we are ready to get started. And for today, I prepared a little use case. And in the use case, which I want to introduce, I want to analyze some sales data. And therefore, I want to use three different data sources. We have two data sources where we have information about our customers, which is an Excel file, which has the information from our first CRM system, and a CSV file from our second CRM system. And in both of these tables, we have always a customer ID and a sales unit of the different customers. As the third data table that I want to use today, I have some transactions data that might come from an ERP system. And also this information is available in a CSV file. And in this data table, I have always the customer ID, which product a customer did buy, and how much the product did cost. And my goal is now to use these three data sources to calculate the sales performance per sales unit over the different months. This means in the end, I want to have for each sales unit one column where I have the revenue for each month. And how could I do so in Excel, or what would I do in Excel? What I would do in Excel probably is that I would first open the Excel table with the information from our first CRM system. Then I would open the CSV file, which has the information from the second CRM system. And then I could try to combine these two data tables. If I want to combine these two data tables, what I need to take care of is that I have the same column order so that I can then copy one of these data tables and just paste it below. And that's what I'm doing here in the video right now. I'm checking that the columns are sorted in the same way. And then I copy one of the tables and post it below. Then I might want to check for duplicates, and I remove the duplicates in my customer data that I now combine from the two data sources. And then I could open next the transactions data. And the transactions data is also a CSV file, so I can open it in the same way as before for our data from the second CRM system. And once I opened the data from our the transactions data, then the next step would be to add a new column, because in this data table, as you can see, we don't have the sales unit, but we can add the sales unit, for example, by using the VLOOKUP function, which is a quite popular function in Excel, where we say, okay, we want to check for the customer ID in the other data table with our customer information, and then add the sales unit to our transactions data, so that once we have done with this task, we can actually create a pivot table where we calculate the revenue for each month for each sales unit. This means in this case, we would use the year and month information for the rows and the sales information for the columns, and define some aggregations here in the values part. And I now want to show you how you can perform exactly these steps in Knime Analytics Platform. And while we do these tasks in Knime Analytics Platform, you don't need to specifically think of the data tables which I just introduced. You can also think about the things that you normally do in Excel, and when you copy two tables below each other, or when you use the VLOOKUP function. And before we start with automating this process in Knime Analytics Platform, first of all, what is Knime Analytics Platform? And Knime Analytics Platform is an open source tool that allows you to gather, wrangle, model, and visualize data. This means it allows you to access data from different data sources. That could be an Excel file or a CSV file, what we will do in a second, but it could be also data stored in the cloud or in a database. Then we can wrangle this data, bring it together, prepare the data, filter it, and so on, and create reports. The Knime Analytics platform is based on a graphical interface. This means to perform all these tasks, you don't need to write code, so you don't need to learn a new coding language, but instead you can build so-called workflows via drag and drop. In addition to analyze just numerical data like we do today, Knime provides you also many different extensions that also allow you to analyze, for example, unstructured data, like for example, text or images or networks or chemoinformatics data. The key in Knime Analytics platform are then these so-called nodes, these little blocks. And for each task that you might want to perform on your data sets, we have one node. And each node can perform exactly one task. So if you use the Excel reader node, then you can read an Excel file. Here we have the partitioning node. And with the partitioning node, you can partition your data set into two subsets. And therefore, a node has always on the left-hand side some input ports where the data comes in. Then it gets processed by the node, and then we have the data after execution available here at the output ports on the right-hand side. And whenever this traffic light below a node is green, that means that the node is executed, then we can also inspect our data tables, which are the result of the execution of the node. In general, this traffic light below tells us always the status of a node. So normally if we create a new node, the traffic light is often red, what means that this node is not configured yet. This means we might need to define some setting options. For example, if we want to read an Excel file, where is this Excel file located that we want to read? After we configured the node, then normally the traffic light is yellow. That means this node is now ready to get executed. And after we executed the node, it's hopefully green, what would mean then that the data tables are now available at the output port. And in case something went wrong during the execution, then we get this red circle with the white cross, which tells us, okay, some error occurred. And then we can combine many of these nodes into a workflow. And with one workflow, we can then automate one process. A while ago, I started with a little booklet, which you can download for free from our website, which is the From Excel to Knime booklet, where I translate commonly used Excel functionality into Knime nodes. And I now want to show you how you can use the Knime Analytics platform together with this Excel to Knime booklet to automate the process which I just showed you in Excel. And therefore, I will switch right away to the Knime Analytics platform. What we can see here is our Knime Analytics platform, where we have the heart kind of in the middle, where you can actually build your workflows. And here we see already a workflow where we analyze some event registrations data. But what I would like to do now is I would like to start a new workflow to analyze our sales data. To start a new workflow, I need to go into the Knime Explorer, which is here on the upper left. Under local, I have here all my workflows, all my projects. And we have here also the examples workflows where we can already find some example workflows. I now want to create a new workflow under local. And to create a new workflow, I can just right click on local and say new Knime workflow. Then I need to define a name for this workflow, for example, sales analysis. And I can click finish. Then Knime Analytics platform will create a new workflow, which I can see on one hand here in the Knime Explorer, and on the other hand, I see here a new empty workflow. The first task that we wanted to perform is to read in an Excel file with the CRM information from our first CRM system. Therefore, I can move now to the From Excel to Knime book. And if I look into the table of contents, then I see here, okay, we have one part where we explain how you can open an Excel file. So I could click here on opening an Excel file, and then I would get here a description, which node I would need. And we see here, okay, we need the Excel reader node, and always the important setting options are marked. For example, whenever we want to read an Excel file, for sure, we need to define where the file is located and which sheet we want to read. So let's see how we can use the Excel reader node in Knime Analytics platform. First of all, we need to create a new Excel reader node. How can we create a new Excel reader node? For this task, we need to move on to the node repository, which is here on the lower left. And here we have this little search bar where I can now type in Excel Reader. And then I see here the Excel Reader node. How can I now create an Excel Reader node? There I have two options. One option is that I just create an Excel Reader node via drag and drop. And the other option is that I just double click on the Excel Reader node in the node repository. I will delete now one of them. As we can see at the moment, the traffic light is red. This means this node needs some configuration because we need to define which Excel file we actually want to read in. And to open the configuration window, we have again two options. One option is to double click on the node, and the other option is to right click the node and select configure. Then a configuration window opens, and I can click now here on the browse button to browse to my desktop where I have the demo data which I prepared for the day, and I can select CRM1 XLSX. Then I can click OK. And then I get here also a preview. And in my case, I have only one sheet in this Excel file. So it's correctly to read the first sheet by default. And I can check also here in the preview whether all the settings are correctly. And I see, okay, the table that I want to read in has column headers and they are also nicely used. So all the settings are okay. So I can click OK. And I'm now ready to execute the node. How can we now execute the node? To execute the node, we can, for example, right-click the node and select execute, or we can select the node and press F7. Also there we have many options. I now click execute. The node is getting executed and the execution was successful, as I can see by the screen traffic light, what means that now the data table is also available here at the output port. How can we inspect the table at the output port? To inspect the table at the output port, you can always right-click and then select the last option here in the context menu. And it will be always the last option, but the name that you find here is different depending on the node. And I can then select file table and then I see, okay, in my data from the first CRM system, I always have the sales unit, the customer ID, the first and last name, the email address, and whether the person signed up for our newsletter or not. To remember later what kind of table I did read in, I can also change this node label by double-clicking here and then say, for example, CRM1. The next task that we performed in our Excel process was that we were reading in the CSV file with the customer information from our second CRM system. Therefore, I need the next node. And I can now go back into the Excel to Knime book to check how I can read a CSV file, or what I can do as well is I can also browse here in the node repository through the different categories and through all the nodes which I have currently installed. Because in the node repository, you have all the nodes that you have currently installed sorted by different categories. And here I can find, for example, the CSV reader node, and then I can create again the CSV reader node using one of the two options, either via drag and drop or via the double click. I now double clicked to create the CSV reader node. Then again, I need to define which file I want to read. This means I need to open the configuration window, and I can open the configuration window, for example, by double clicking on the node. Then I need to press again on browse to my desktop into my demo sales folder, where I have the data from the second CRM system in a CSV file. Also here I get a preview and I have a few setting options in case the preview doesn't look correctly. For example, if it doesn't use the column headers and there are column headers, or whether in case there are row IDs which are not used by the data table, then you can kind of change the settings here. Then I can say, okay, I can change again the node label and say, for example, CRM2. Then I need to execute the node, and to execute the node, I again right-click and then click execute. If I want to inspect the output, I can again right-click and then go into the last option. Or the other option that you have is that you can go here to the node monitor, which is next to the console on the bottom. And the node monitor always shows you the data table of the node which you selected. So this is another way how you can also inspect the data table at the output port. The next step in our Excel process was then to write the two data tables below each other. This means we want to append one of the data tables to the other data table. For this, we need the next node, the next task, the next node. This means we can now go again into the Excel to Knime book and search, for example, for append data. And then I see, we have here the part appending data. I can click here and I see, to append data in Excel, what I would do, I would copy and paste the two data tables. In Knime Analytics platform, I can use for this task the concatenate node. And if I check then the nodes, then I see also that in Knime Analytics platform, the order of the columns doesn't have to be the same. So you remember in Excel, we have to make sure that the column order is the same. In Knime Analytics platform, it's enough if the column headers are the same so that Knime Analytics platform knows which columns should be below each other. So let's see how we can use the concatenate in Knime Analytics platform. I move back to the node repository. I again use here the search bar and I type in concatenate and I see here the concatenate node. Then I create a concatenate node via drag and drop. And now I can connect the output port of my Excel reader node with the input port of my concatenate node by clicking on the output port and drawing a connection line to the input port. And I do the same also for my information from the second CRM system. And also this node has a configuration window that I can open with double click, but in this case, I will just use the default settings. To execute the node, I again right click and execute. Now I have the two data tables written below each other. And I can also see this here in the node monitor by looking here at the numbers of how many rows my output table has. Because if I go, for example, to the Excel reader node, I see I have roughly 8,500. From the second CRM system, I get roughly 3,500. And after the concatenate node, we have 11,977. The next task would be to remove duplicates. And also, therefore, I can move to my Excel to Knime book and select and search for remove duplicates. And also for this, we have an explanation of how this works in Excel and how this works in Knime Analytics platform. And we see in Knime Analytics platform to remove duplicates, we can use the duplicate row filter. In Excel, I have the option to select the columns for duplicate detection and then click OK via this window here. And also in Knime Analytics platform, I can select the columns for duplicate detection. Just here, I can select the columns I want to use for duplicate detection. This means the columns where we have to have the same values in two different rows, that it is actually a duplicate via this include-exclude frame. So let's use the duplicate row filter node. So I can search for it in the node repository. And now I will show you another trick. Instead of now creating the duplicate row filter node via drag and drop and then connecting the duplicate row filter node to the concatenate node, what I can do as well is I can also select the concatenate node and then double click on the row filter node. And this has the advantage that it now creates the duplicate row filter node and connects it right away to the concatenate node. And I can just save some clicks and I don't have to draw this connection line manually. Then I can go into the configuration window in case I want to change the columns that I want to use for duplicate detection. But I would say, okay, something is a duplicate if we have the same value in all of the columns. Then I can say, okay, and execute. I might want to also change here the node label, for example, to remove duplicates. The next step was then to open our transaction data. And therefore I could create again a CSV reader node and then open the configuration window and define which file I want to read. But there's also another option which I want to show you, because if I go into my Finder where I have the transaction.csv file, what I can do as well is I can also drag and drop the CSV file from my Finder into Knime Analytics platform. Then Knime Analytics platform will create the right node to read this data file, in this case a CSV reader node, and will set for me the file path already. This means now I can click just OK and execute the node to read in my transaction data, and I might want to change again the node label. I now open the output or the table at the output port with a right click and then the last option. I see what we have now is always the order number, the date, when the customer did buy the product and which customer did buy the product, but what is missing is the sales unit. And we added the sales unit before with a VLOOKUP. Let's find out how we can perform a VLOOKUP in Knime Analytics platform by moving back to the Excel to Knime book. So I can search here, for example, for VLOOKUP. That didn't work. VLOOKUP. And here we go. As this is a really popular function in Excel, I, of course, included it also in the book. And here in the book, you can see, okay, the VLOOKUP function is used for many different tasks, but I used to use the VLOOKUP function for two things: to look up a certain value or to actually join columns based on a primary key. For example, to join the product information based on the product ID. And for this task, we can use in Knime Analytics platform the joiner node, where we use the joining column, or the values in the joining columns are actually the lookup values from the VLOOKUP in Excel. So let's move to Knime Analytics platform and look for the joiner node. I can then create a joiner node and connect it with the output port of the duplicate row filter node. This means with our customer data and with our transaction data. Then I double click on the joiner node to open the configuration window. And then, like in Excel, you need to define the lookup value. We now need to define a matching criterion or the joining columns. Therefore, I click here on Add Matching Criterion and say I want to match based on the customer ID. Customer ID. I have here now also the option to define which rows I actually want to have at the output port. Do I want to have only the rows where we have customer IDs that were available in both tables, in our customer data and in the transaction data? Or do I want to have in my output table all the transaction rows? And if there is no matching customer ID, then I want to have, for example, a missing value. I say now that I want to have just the rows at the output port where we had some transaction data for this customer and the customer was also in our customer table. But I want to route the unmatched rows to these separate ports because you probably saw that the joiner node has 3 output ports. And then we will see here the rows which don't have a matching customer ID in case there is any. And then we have also here this column selection tab, because I don't want to have all columns from our customer table information, but I just want to add the sales unit. Then I can say OK and execute. And now we can look at the output from the upper output port where we see, OK, we have now the customer ID and the sales unit and which products the customer has bought. And we can also check the output port tables here at the other ports by changing here the port. And then we see, OK, we don't have any unmatching rows from the upper table, and we don't have any unmatching rows from the lower table. But if I open now the first table, just because then it's a bit bigger, you see we have now the data that we need for our pivot table, because we have here the sales unit, and we have the customer ID, and how much money the customer did spend with this, by buying this product. The next step was then to create the pivot table, and also therefore I want to move a last time into my Excel to Knime book. So I can look for pivot, and also the way how you can create pivot table is explained in the book. And if we think about how we create a pivot table in Excel, there we have to define the rows, the columns, and the values. And also these settings you need to define in the pivoting node in Knime Analytics platform. Just here, the row setting is called groups, the pivot setting is called, or the column setting is called pivots, and what you define under values you can define in Knime Analytics platform under manual aggregations. Okay, then let's use the pivoting node in Knime Analytics platform. This means I go back into the node repository. I look for the pivoting node. I can select the joiner node and double click on the pivoting node to create it and to connect it right away. Then I can again double click on the pivoting node to open the configuration window. And here we have now the settings for groups, pivots, and manual aggregation. Remember, groups is in Excel the same as rows, and there we selected year and month in the Excel demo. Pivots is the same as the column settings, and there we selected sales unit. And manual aggregation is the same as values, and we want to aggregate based on the price, so I can double click on the price. And then I have here a drop-down menu where I can select between different aggregation methods, and I want to take now the sum, so we get the sum of all the products which were bought. And then I can execute the pivoting node, and then at the first output port, I actually get my pivot table where I have now for each year and month combination and for each sales unit, the revenue. And that's what we created also in Excel. What is always nice also is to visualize your data, and how that's also possible in Knime. So if I now want to visualize how the sales performance has changed over time, I could use, for example, the stacked area chart in Knime Analytics platform and connect it with my pivoting node and say, okay, on my x-axis, I just want to have the rows, and I want to visualize the revenue data for the different sales units. And then I can click execute and open view to see a stacked area chart. So I see how the revenue has changed for each sales unit over time and how my total revenue has changed over time. A few things that I haven't mentioned yet, but what are nice to know is here we have always a node description. So whenever you are not sure what a node exactly can do for you, you can select the node either in a workflow or in the node repository here. And then you get here a description of what the node can do in general, and also a description of the different setting options that we have in the configuration window. Another tip is here the workflow code, which I didn't use today, but which I also find really helpful, because when you build workflows, you sometimes come to the point, okay, which node do I need to use next? You saw the kind of the pattern. What I always did is I created the next node, I configured the node, I executed the node. I thought about the next task, I searched for the next node, I configured the node, I executed the node. And sometimes this recommendation engine can be helpful to actually help you to find out which might be the next node, because whenever you select a node here in the workflow editor, then it gives you hints which nodes are most commonly used by the Knime community. Another really good way to find other resources is the Knime Hub, which you have here next to the description, where you can search on one hand for nodes, but also for workflows. What I showed you is just really a subset of what you can do with Knime Analytics platform. We just did read in an Excel file and a CSV file, but in general, you can also access many different data sources, which could be a cloud or in a database. In addition, we also integrate a lot of other tools, like for example, you can send data right away to your Tableau server or to Power BI to create the reports. This means you can access the data, prepare your data with Knime Analytics platform, but then also move on to for the visualization part to another tool, even though you can also do this in Knime Analytics platform. And for the predictive part, we also integrate a lot of other tools which allow you to train a lot of different predictive models in case you want to use Knime Analytics platform, not only as an ETL tool, but also to train predictive models and to deploy your predictive models. What is now my personal conclusion if I think about Excel Visual Knime? If I think about Excel, then I think about a tool that is widely used and a lot of people know how to use it, which is definitely something that is good. And definitely something where we also see that it has this kind of things that are good to do with Excel. But if I think about processes that I have in Excel, then I see the problem that processes are actually not automatically documented in Excel. And therefore, it's then actually hard to reuse our Excel sheets. And in my example, it was an easy example, but already there, you need to write down somewhere that you actually need to check for duplicates at some point. And it gets even harder if you use VBAs. And therefore, as it is hard to reuse, I think it's also quite time consuming, because quite often, even though a colleague has maybe an Excel sheet that can do it perform the task for you, if you don't know what exactly your colleague has done there, then you can't reuse it and you start again from the beginning. And therefore, it's also time consuming and error prone in case you try to reuse existing Excel sheets. And as it is not documented, I think also the cooperation is more difficult. Because you need a lot of time and you need someone who actually explains you what are the different steps you need to perform step by step. And another limitation is the limitation of rows that we have in Excel, which we don't have in Knime Analytics platform. So we can't analyze really huge data sets. If I think about Knime workflows, then I think of workflows that document the process automatically. And therefore, it is easier to reuse them, because the only thing I need to change now, if I want to make the same sales report a month later, I maybe need to adjust the path for the files where I can find them, or I can just replace the files in the same folder with the same names, and then I can execute my workflow right away. And therefore, I can save some time. In addition, it's also easier to share, because I can just share the workflow with a colleague, maybe including the data, and then my colleague can easily understand what is this workflow doing. Okay, it reads in these different data sources. I see, then we remove the duplicates, then we add a column, and especially by changing always this node label into a little comment, it's easy to understand and therefore also easy to share. I also think that it's easy to learn because you don't need to learn a new coding language. It's easy to learn and to use because you can always just look for the right node and then drag and drop the node. Then you have a visual interface where you can define all your settings, which makes it easy to learn and use. And the last thing is that it's free and open source. So you can just go to our website, download and install Knime Analytics platform and start using it right away. If you now want to learn more, what kind of options do you have? So on one hand, we have some instructor-led courses for Knime Analytics platform for data wranglers in September, which you can join, where you can learn in the first course more about how you can access data from different data sources and wrangle your data. And in the second week of this course, how you can automate your processes more by using special parameters. If you don't want to wait until September, then we have also our free self-paced courses for data wranglers. And I added here a link for you to our self-paced courses. If you are rather a person who learns by reading a book, then I have also something for you, because we have also a book that introduces you to the first steps into Knime Analytics platform, which is our Knime Beginner's Luck book. And you can actually get a free version of this book by using the promotion code First Steps 0721. And with this, I want to thank you for attending our webinar today, and I'm happy to answer any open questions if there are open questions. Marit, are there any questions for me?
Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for the questions. One question was about how to read data from multiple sheets.
How to read data from multiple sheets. To read data from multiple sheets, you can either use multiple Excel reader nodes, but that doesn't really scale. And for this, we can use a loop in Knime Analytics platform. So we can first create a table that has all the different sheet names, because we have the Excel sheet names reader node. And then we can loop over this Excel file. And that's something that you actually learn in the L2 Data Wrangler course. So if you attend our L2 Data Wrangler course afterwards, you will know how you can build loops in Knime Analytics platform and read in all sheets in one Excel file automatically.
Thank you, Catherine. Then there is another one, which I'm not quite sure. Maybe the question by Karunesh is something that he could ask via email afterwards. But then there is a question, can we read data from a multiple access databases? Microsoft Access, I think, is meant here.
Microsoft Access. Do we have a dedicated reader node for Microsoft Access, Mara? Do you know by any chance?
Now that I mentioned,
so actually, maybe we can find out.
Yes, we have. Yeah, we have Microsoft Access connector, and this is the node to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
So also, how I normally find out is by going to the Knime Hub, which I just also mentioned. So if I open my browser and I go to hub.knime.com, if I don't have Marit around to ask, then I would search here for Microsoft, for example, and for nodes. And then I find here the Microsoft Access connector node. So we do have a dedicated node, which allows you to access data in a Microsoft Access database. And then with our database nodes, you can actually assemble SQL queries to access data from a database without writing any SQL code, because these nodes then create the SQL code that you need to access the data in these different databases.
Okay, then there is another question about the different configuration of Excel reader in Knime 3.7 and 4.4. Do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah. So what we are doing at the moment at Knime, or what we did in the last few releases, is that we introduced a new file handling, which makes it now easier for you to define which file you want to read in. As long as you are just using it for your own purposes and you are not trying to share, it is not really important how you define a file path, because then you can just define where it is on your local machine. But actually, if you start sharing workflows or you are uploading workflows to a Knime server, then it's important to use, for example, workflow relative paths. And that was not so easy because you did need to know exactly how this works in Knime Analytics platform. And we now made this easier, that you can do all these things via drag and drop, and that you have the same interface in all the reader nodes. And now with Knime Analytics platform 4.4, you will find the same setting options, or the setting options look in all reader and writer nodes the same. And we have implemented this now for almost all of our reader and writer nodes.
Okay, thank you, Katrin. There is this one question left about the duplicate row filter, but I think we are so much over time already that I encourage you, Karunesh, to ask this question via email. I'm sure we find the answer.
Okay, I haven't read this question yet.
Yeah.
I trust you, Marit. Thank you, Marit, for summarizing the questions. And thank you everyone for joining. And then I wish you all a nice afternoon. And I hope to see you maybe in one of our courses where we would meet maybe again. And besides this, maybe in one of our other events, hopefully at some point in person again. Have a nice day or evening, everyone. Bye-bye.